Good day to everyone. Heike, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished participants, and welcome to our joint IMO, IAPH and BIMCO webinar on Maritime Single Window 2024, Window of Opportunities for Shipping. Today, we will discuss the benefits and opportunities for maritime trade arising from the digitalization of the clearance of ships in ports worldwide and the application of the Maritime Single Window concept. As you may be aware, contracting governments to the FAL Convention need to implement the Maritime Single Window concept for electronic ship clearance processes in ports before January 2024. This webinar today also wants to highlight how important the collaboration between government agencies, ports, stakeholders, and the shipping industry is for a successful digitalization of the ship-port interface. For this reason, IMO, IAPH, and BIMCO have joined forces to organize this webinar. I would also ask you to please save the following dates: 18th and 19th January 2023, when a hybrid symposium allowing in-person and remote participation will take place at IMO, bringing together experts from governments, ports, the shipping industry, and standards organizations to shed more light on key challenges and opportunities for accelerating digitalization, including the implementation of maritime single windows. It now only remains for me to wish you an interesting time listening to and discussing matters with the distinguished speakers that will address you today. Mr. Michael Renz of Sweden, current chair of the IMO Expert Group on Data Harmonization and the Working Group on Electronic Business of the FAL Committee, Dr. Patrick Verhoeven, Managing Director Policy and Strategy in the International Association of Ports and Harbors, and Mr. Jeppe Juul, Manager Maritime Safety and Security at BIMCO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heike. This webinar is being live streamed through IMO's YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/IMOHQ, where you are able to follow the event, but also pose your questions via the chat function to the speakers. We'll reply to the questions after the webinar, if not addressed already by the speakers, and make sure those are considered in depth during the symposium that we are organizing in January. So please let us know your questions and concerns. Now, before I introduce the speakers, let's look at a short movie explaining the role of maritime single windows in facilitating digital data exchange in international shipping.
When ships enter and leave ports, vital information must be exchanged with various entities ashore. Port authorities, pilots, maritime administrations, and for security and protection reasons. The way this information is shared is crucial. Digitalization is key. It not only reduces errors, it's the quality of the information being exchanged. When automated, digitalization is less time-consuming and more efficient. IMO is here to help. Since 2019, IMO requires data to be exchanged electronically between the ship's reporting parties, such as the master, ship agents and shipping lines, and the authorities ashore. IMO also recommends using the single window concept, where data is submitted through a single portal without duplication and distributed to the correct authorities. But to share, exchange, and understand the data, ships and ports need to use international, harmonized standards. Different groups of stakeholders have different objectives and different work processes. Therefore, more than one standard is used for ship reporting. That is why IMO and the standards bodies, ISO, UNECE, and WCO, have agreed on an IMO dataset and an IMO reference data model known as the IMO Compendium. This is a set of standards for the submission of maritime-related data. IMO encourages all stakeholders to adopt the IMO compendium when building their digital systems. This will make it possible for all to communicate, because no matter which standard their system is based on, the data can be exchanged. This is known as interoperability. Enabling interoperability of single windows and systems reduces the administrative burden. For example, the compendium allows single windows to integrate, enabling closer coordination between customs and maritime authorities during clearance processes. And, going forward, the standards bodies, maritime industry and member states continue to work collaboratively to maintain and expand the compendium, adding new data elements. Harmonizing data standards in areas such as the Maritime Declaration of Health, operational data to facilitate the just-in-time operation of ships, dangerous goods, or ship certificates, supports the digitalization of ships and ports with clear safety and environmental benefits for all. Check IMO guidelines for help on setting up a maritime single window. Learn from the experiences of member states around the world who have done so successfully, and help make simpler, more efficient maritime trade a reality.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that video. For those of you that might have had some streaming problems, you can find that video on the IMO YouTube channel, and it's called Digitalization, Key to Facilitate International Maritime Traffic. We will also send a link at the end of this transmission. Okay, it's time to introduce our speakers. As mentioned by Heike, we've got three today. The first speaker will be Mr. Mika Rentz. He is the IT strategist at the Swedish Maritime Administration, with long experience in developing, architecting and releasing IT systems, including the Maritime Single Window in his country. He's the current chair of the IMO expert group on data harmonization and chairs the working group on electronic business of the FAL committee. The second speaker will be Dr. Patrick Verhoeven. He's Managing Director of Policy and Strategy at the International Association of Ports and Harbours, and he'll be speaking about the ports view. And then we have Mr. Jeppe Skolbakker-Juel. He is the Manager of Maritime Safety and Security at BIMCO, representing the shipping industry's point of view. So if we could have our first speaker join us, Mika, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Victor. Also, thank you, Heike, for the good introduction on this important topic. So I will see if I can share my screen here.
Great.
Good, then I will begin. So, my name is Michael Rentz, as said, and I will begin by sort of setting the scene, what can be found at IMO level and what we have done in the last couple of years regarding Maritime Single Window. So over the last couple of years, IMO Facilitation Committee has made a couple of decisions to support the setup of a Maritime Single Window. And I will provide you here with some examples of what's been done. So in 2019, it came into force that the member states should accept electronic formalities from the ship when they sort of entering the port. Also in 2019, we approved the new IMO compendium, which had been completely restructured. There was also a new guideline for setting up a Maritime Single Window to help the member states get the work going. And over the years from 2019 up until now, we worked on improvements on those things. In 2022, a new guideline came on for support of electronic messaging, was approved by the FAL committee. And here comes the key. The Facilitation Committee has approved amendments to the Facilitation Convention, which makes the single window for data exchange mandatory in ports around the world. This will make a sort of a significant step in the acceleration digitalization. So in short words, a maritime single window is to be used for electronic exchange. And that is in little more than a year. We also have ongoing work at the FAL committee to help the member states and the port states to actually do this kind of work. And that we have the expert group of data harmonization for, which is meeting right now, this week. And they are maintaining the IMO compendium. I will come back to exactly what the IMO compendium is about just in a short while. I would also like to say that we are also producing new guidelines that will help set up sort of the world around a maritime single window, where we have port community system guidelines, we have guidance for port operational data coming, and also there is a plan to include port nautical data as new guidelines from the facilitation committee to help support setting up a maritime single window in your country. So the IMO compendium then, what is that? Many people talk about it. I'm not so sure that there are that many that have seen it, but it's online and it's visual, and it is a tool for software and business developers to, help them to align languages and to share the same views on the data that is supposed to be delivered to a maritime single window. I must stress, this is not a standard. It's a reference model bringing standard organizations together, like you've seen on the movie from the WCO, UNEC, and ISO. It also includes more than the facilitation, than the FAL convention itself. So you can, for example, find information on just-in-time, ballast water management, certificates, and some other data sets. To be a bit more concrete, what you will find in the compendium, you will of course find all the information mentioned in the facilitation, in the FAL convention, and also nowadays other IMO instruments. And what's been done here is that we have broken down everything into individual data elements and giving them names. So if you look at on the screen here, you can, for example, see that if you are in the facilitation in the convention itself, you would read stuff like name and type of ship. And if you then would move on into the compendium, then you would see that these kind of text has been shifted to state ship name and ship type coded. That is the IMO compendium name for those two data elements. However, if you are going to do a maritime single window implementation, you need technical standards. And those technical standards have messages that you can directly use for transferring data from one system to another system. And here we have our partner organization, UNEC, which is a large standard on multimodal transportation, and they call the same data type vessel name and vessel type code. And as you can see, WCO has different names, ISO is pretty close, but if you're a computer, you will not understand this. So that's why the compendium is in the middle to translate between the convention and then the actual implementation. So, actual implementation. There are implementation ongoing around the world, and since I'm from Sweden, part of EU, we have within EU decided that we will have a regional maritime single window for all the member states. This is to be harmonized on EU level. So a ship should see the same interface moving from one member state to another. And the really, really good thing here is that the IMO compendium is fully included in the legislation. So you can say that what's been cooking now within the EU is fully aligned with what we are doing at IMO. And if you are really interested in digging into technical stuff, there are a lot of specifications coming up from this rather large project where you can find user identification and all sorts of interesting things. So if you are really interested, look out for those specifications. So before I stop, in spite of all of the works produced here at IMO, it actually still boils down to get the job done in your port state. For me, myself, being part of setting up a Maritime Single Window, this is actually really fun work. You get to know people from all over the industry. I mean, from the public administrations to ports, agents, as well as owners of the ship or the operators. I have been doing this for more than 15 years, and I still really enjoy it. Even if you think about it, it's a bit strange that you really can enjoy digitalized regulations, but I do. So if you have any opportunity to get on board a Maritime Single Window project, I think you are lucky, because it will be a fun ride. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mikael. And we very much enjoy and will enjoy boarding that particular ride. I'd like to now turn to the ports and to Patrick Verhoeven. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Victor. Sharing the screen as well. That should all be there. Thank you very much, and also thank you to Heike and colleagues at IMO for facilitating and cooperating on this webinar. It's really a very important milestone. We're almost 1 year ahead of the deadline for the implementation of the Maritime Single Window, and it's great that we can cooperate with IMO and with BIMCO in sort of raising awareness and making sure that member states and all stakeholders involved will be able to meet this deadline. It's been mentioned a couple of times already. This is what FAL decided, the FAL committee of the IMO decided on the mandatory implementation, the mandatory requirement for public authorities to establish, maintain, and use a maritime single system with genuine opportunities for the electronic exchange of information on the arrival, stay, departure of ships in ports. We like to see it as a single window, as a window of multiple opportunities, and I will go a little bit more in depth in these opportunities in a minute. Just the definition again, because there is maybe sometimes still a bit of confusion what a single window is or what it's supposed to be. But it's first and foremost, I think, a platform for data collaboration between public and private stakeholders, so that that platform can enable the orchestration and optimization of business processes between organizations that are involved in the arrival, the stay, and the departure of ships in ports. And all that happens to a single one truth submission of standardized and harmonized data. And that's what Michael was referring to as well. The standardization aspect is, of course, extremely important in making this work. I'm sure that most people on this call or on this webinar will be aware about the complexity of the parties, the number of parties that are involved in the data exchange that happens in the Maritime Single Window. We have public stakeholders and private stakeholders, various authorities, including Port Authority, Port State Control, Customs, Health Authority, Immigration, and you name it. And of course, also the commercial parties, the private stakeholders that are involved in the arrival, the call and departure of a vessel, including the lines, the agents, the nautical service operators like towage and pilotage and mooring services, of course, the cargo handling companies, terminal operators, and the freight forwarders. They're all part of this complex process, all having access to data, all having data needs. And the idea is indeed that through Maritime Single Window, we simplify that process. What are these windows of opportunity that I mentioned earlier? It's not just one, there are several. Of course, very straightforward. Why are we doing this? It's to become more efficient, to make sure that the vessel, the time that a vessel is spending at anchor and at berth is reduced. It's not only good for efficiency, but it's also good to minimize the emissions. And I think the policy of data collaboration and digitalization ties in very well with the other big IMO priority, which is about reducing emissions, specifically greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. So you have really a win-win here. It's also about reducing the vessel clearance process, speeding up the departure of the ship, and apart from efficiency and reduced emissions, it's also about improving safety. You can improve the safety of a call if you have data certainty and data availability. We've just come out of a long period with a major health issue in the world, and that has also opened our eyes. I think that in the maritime industry, there is still a lot of human ship-to-shore interaction. And by digitalizing and using a maritime single window, we may also reduce risk in terms of health and not just only safety. So that's another opportunity or a window of opportunity that Maritime Single Window is creating. And on efficiency, I think it's also about allowing authorities and companies that are serving the vessel to synchronize their activities in tandem with vessel arrival and departure time. And finally, if we look at the bigger picture, because we've been focusing, of course, on the ship-shore interface, that's what FAL is all about, that's what the single window is all about, but also this provides opportunities to increase the wider supply chain predictability, thanks to advanced vessel and cargo information, and thus optimizing processes and risk management. And again, this is something that has become very topical in the last year or year and a half, where we had a lot of supply chain issues, I think, in ports around the world. Clearly, the introduction of the Maritime Single Window provides an opportunity to also work on the broader supply chain predictability. What are the ship-shore data needs that have to be exchanged under the FAL Convention and the obligation to introduce the Maritime Single Window? You see them here, the General Declaration, Cargo Declaration or Manifest, the Ship Store Declaration, the Cruise Effect Declaration, the Crew List, the Passenger List, Dangerous Good Manifest, the Special Declaration for Postal Items, Maritime Declaration of Health, as I said, very topical, has been very topical during the past 2 years, the Ship Sanitation Control Certificate, security-related info, Advanced Electronic Cargo Information, and the Advanced Notification for Waste Delivery. Finally, to conclude my introduction from the port perspective, why are we seeing this deadline, 1st of January 2024, not as something that is to be dreaded, but something that we really should all be as enthusiastic as Michael was about getting there and creating that window of opportunity, really, because it allows us to go even beyond the formal IMO FAL data requirements, but also introduce the vessel clearance process and the port call process, and that we can, for the first time, have standards for the full port call process. And actually, these standards are available. We are not having to reinvent the wheel here. I think that's another very important message. This is not about creating something completely new. It's about using data standards that are available for the benefit of efficiency and the benefit of, as I said earlier, reducing emissions and also making the operations more safe. So Victor, I would leave it for that. I'm sure we can go into a bit more detail during the discussions, but thank you once again for the opportunity, and thank you to the colleagues at IMO and BIMCO for this collaboration.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Patrick. We've now had the port side of the story. I think it's time that we switch now to the shipping side of the story. And for that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeppe Skovbakke-Juel. Jeppe, if you could bring your presentation to us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you so much. And thank you for IMO and my good colleagues, Michael Rent and also Patrick Van Oven, for attending this good webinar. It's correct. My name is Jeppe Skovbakke-Juhl. I'm manager at our Department for Maritime Safety and Security. And as Michael just mentioned, that he has been working with digitalization for 15 years. I have been working with digitalization equally, maybe only 10. But BIMCO is, as a ship owner association, we are very focused on digitalization. In particular because we are one of the users, maybe the end user of the information, because we are submitting information from the ship to shore. Maritime transport is indeed the backbone of world commerce. When it comes to digitalization, the shipping industry and maritime industry in general has been lacking behind for some reasons, but we believe that this is about to change. These days, we have a strong focus on the development of new shipping technologies coming in place, and in particular to the use of digitalization. And there is a reason for that. And one of the reasons is that we can bring down the administrative burden on board. But we also see that during the pandemic, we have been forced to re-examine our normal routines in such a way that we have taken a gigantic leap forward working in a digital way. I believe I have now shared my, or change to the next slide, yes. But when we talk about digitalization and the Maritime Single Window and the window of opportunities, we also have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by digitalization? If you ask the master on board, it's about getting the data from other ships, maybe exchanging routes and via the satellite provider. But if you ask the people ashore in the operational department, it's about getting the big data, that is a theme of itself, but information about sensor readings on board, about the fuel consumption and the exhaust gas temperatures. But if again you ask the charterer, it's about the ship's position and the condition of the cargo, when to load and unload. And you can ask the hinterland and the ports. They pay attention to when the ship is arriving and departing, so they can align their services. And then again, if you ask the authorities and the administrative authorities, it's about having these information on exchanging information prior to the port call. So all stakeholders in this equation do have different focus depending on where you are in the logistic chain. This also means that it's very different information we are asking for. So it's not only to establish one system in such way that you can exchange a certain amount of information. It's too big to look in a bigger picture. So harmonization of the data is essential, and also what we have heard from the previous speakers is about making things interoperable so we can exchange information from the platform to platform. Back in 2020, the World Bank endorsed that we should establish a kind of unified measure in order for us to exchange information. And that could, for instance, be through what we call the just-in-time concept. It's very important that we establish such a common framework to ease our exchange of information. And that is exactly the subject of today, the forthcoming implementation deadline of 1st January 2024, which will establish the requirements for these maritime single windows for ships and port to exchange the information. With all the work done here at IMO, which you have heard in the previous presenters, most of it is set out in the IMO compendium, aiming to harmonize these data elements requirements for the port and to standardize the electronic messages And the compendium is indeed a very important tool. It will certainly give the industry in general a window, or maybe a frame of window of opportunities for digitalization in shipping in general. This picture shows what kind of data we are looking at. We have the ship integrated data, which is specific data exchange, the sender readings, the fuel consumptions, which I talked about. We also have the nautical data, the operational data, and the administrative data, which Michael was referring to. But we also do have business-to-business information, such like the just-in-time case, and maybe also electronic bills of lading. And currently, the IMO compendium are comprising the three in the middle, but it could actually in the future be so that it goes beyond what is included in the IMO in what we have currently in the compendium, in such a way that we also include the business-to-business data, and maybe also the ship integrated data, because why do not share those information which are common in a smart way? I have illustrated this by what I call the IMO compendium, the bow tie concept. To the very left, you can see the exchange of information between the master, the agent, the manager, the owners, and they share their information to some extent internally. To the very left, or to the very right, you can see the authorities and the Maritime Single Window and the service providers as well. They share all sorts of information, immigration, police information, health declaration, and so on. And right in the middle of this, we have the IMO compendium and what we call the IMO reference data model. And that is the center of the exchange of information. And one side of the bow tie cannot live without having the other one in place. And as I'm representing the industry, we are very much focused on how can we make sure that whatever information we submit is submitted into a uniform and harmonized maritime single window across the globe, so we don't have to have different solution compared to whether we are approaching one port in the world compared to another port in the world. It is like this this power plug problem we always face when we are traveling around the world, that we have one power plug and a different socket, and they normally don't fit together. The IMO reference data model and the compendium is that converter, so we can exchange information between platforms in a smart and easy way. That is the window of opportunities. So my final slide is that we should look into harmonization and interoperability, because without, we are not able to exchange the information in a smart, easy way. And we have to do that by use of global and robust standards, which we develop in collaboration to ensure this digitalization. And we also need to establish smarter collaboration between us. So we talk, we share, we open our development for each other, so we can actually make interaction between our various platforms. Only by that we can ensure a maritime single window in a smart and easy way, and we can have a full-blown window of opportunities. Thank you, Victor, and I'm looking very much forward to the forthcoming questions, if any, from the audience. And many thanks to IMO and for hosting this this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jeppe, for the shipping side of the story. That's excellent. In the meantime, in the chat, I'd like to welcome all the colleagues who've tuned in very early in their mornings from Venezuela, Argentina, Also, greetings to people from Saudi Arabia and not so far away from me here in Antwerp. What we'll now do is go through a round of questions to the panelists. Perhaps, Mikael, if I could turn to you first. What are the main success factors when implementing a maritime single window project based on your experience?
Okay, thanks for that question, Victor. There are, of course, many important things to consider when implementing a maritime single window. You have getting the stakeholders involved, doing different studies, getting support from the political side, and not to forget to get a good project team in place. Otherwise, you would probably be completely lost. What I would put as sort of the main success factor is actually to point out one single entity as head of the implementation. If you have multiple agencies in charge, I think that would make it very difficult and also a high risk for the project. So if you just pick one thing to start off with and sort of have as the key success factor, I think it's to appoint one administration and just task them with a full maritime single window implementation. Even if they are not responsible for all of the national legislation. I mean, for example, in Sweden, it's the Maritime Administration, that's my administration, which has the lead on national level. And it is our responsibility that, for example, the customs get their own information. This doesn't make it our responsibility how the customs perform in their internal processes. That's up to the customs. But it is for us as the head of sort of the maritime single window to make sure it works and that the information goes to the correct receiver of it. So that is what I would say as the main success factor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, perhaps now if I could turn to Jeppe, I really like your analogy of the bow tie. If I might step towards the left side of the bow tie and ask you the question, what is the shipping industry priority in terms of the MSW implementation globally?
I mean, to industry and to the left part of the bow tie, if I may refer back to that, is of course that we will not be faced by a lot of different solutions. I mean, there may be 100,000 ships and there may be 3,000 ports or even more. And if everybody develop different solutions, we will simply not be able to exchange information in a smart way. So we can only encourage to use common and used robust standards for the ships when reporting data exchange to the port. We have in the past seen early versions of the Maritime Single Window, which has been very unhelpful because it has been different from country to country and even from port to port within the same country. And fortunately, we have a kind of a digital momentum, if I may use that phrase, in such way that when we have developed the IMO compendium to be more electronic or digitalized focused, then we have enhanced the semantic and the data format in such ways that we can implement that on board. So we certainly recommend to use global international solutions compared to national implementation. Otherwise, we simply will not be able to have a smart and global solution for the exchange of information. So that is a priority from industry.
Thank you, Jeppe. And I guess based on that priority that's coming from the shipping side, Patrick, if I could turn to you and ask you then, what can ports actually do themselves to encourage and support maritime single window implementations in their own particular countries?
Thank you for that question, Victor. I would echo what Michael has said. I think it's really important that there is a single entity in charge of the implementation, that you have leadership. I think that also came very clear out of the report that we published with the World Bank in, when was it, end of 2020, for accelerating digitalization in general, not just the Maritime Single Window, but also the next steps. It's really very important that there is leadership there, especially at governmental level, to drive this agenda forward. Now, the port community is diverse, and we have port authorities that are national port authorities that are responsible for all the ports in the country, but there are equally and perhaps even more situations where the port authority is local, owned by a city or by a state, like in the United States. So there are some challenges there, you know, with that unique leadership. But I also think that a port authority, and that's what we try to promote in IAPH, is also uniquely placed in, whether it's national or local, in that it connects to all these stakeholders that I showed in the slide before. Port Authority will have all the connections on the public side with all the relevant authorities, including customs authorities and health and you name it, and will be connecting to the business community as well. We'll have relations with the shipping lines, with the terminal operators, the agents, and so on. So they're actually in a very, very good position to support the implementation of a maritime single window together with government. I think that's really important, that it is together with whoever takes the lead, whether it's the maritime administration, as we heard in Sweden, or another administration, but there needs to be a leader. But ports can really support that because of the, you know, multiple connections that they have. What we try to promote is that the port authority, although the word authority puts it maybe in the column of the, you know, the, let's say, the other authorities, we like to see a port authority as doing more and being maybe in the first place even a community builder, because they're a neutral entity. And as I said, they connect to both public and private stakeholders, perhaps the only one in the port community that has all these connections. So we would encourage that they play that role together with the maritime administration or whoever sort of at IMO level has to implement the 1st of January requirement.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Patrick. Perhaps if I could go back to IMO now, and Michael, I mean, you've had your experience in your own country. I'm sure you've liaised with many projects the IMO has done in other parts of the world when it comes to a maritime single window project. Is there one bigger main advice that you can give someone that's at the start of the journey?
Wow, thanks, Victor. Well, I mean, we have seen the pictures or the presentations here by my good colleagues, Jeppe and also Patrick, to show the complexity of what we are facing here. So if you're in the planning phase, which I would presume you would be in a single window, to start to think of these things, then you have hopefully already chosen a lead administration and are in the verge of setting up the project. So what I would recommend to focus on is actually the interfaces between the national stakeholders, because that is vital to the success of the project. As we are starting to develop the system or the single window itself, because it's not just one IT system that you just put there and then it sort of just works. It's a myriad of complex integration between, like Patrick was talking about, with the ports and all of the port actors behind them. So to set up sort of integration contracts with the national stakeholders, I think it's vital, because you need to get the flow of information between the reporting party and the end information users. And a reporting party, I mean, could be the ship, it could be the agent, it could be someone on that side. However, they could also be end information users. So it's not really black and white here. And from my experience, it is very, very easy to focus only on the declarant, so the reporting party side. You set up really nice graphical user interface on a central level. You produce some system-to-system endpoints for reporting purposes, and then you are happy. But what you then sort of miss is all the complexity when trying to share data within a member state between national administrations, or also in some cases private entities, because a port might be a public administration, but can also be a semi-private company. And all of these things are quite tricky. So if you early on establish integration contracts, you know what kind of information you are pushing back and forth, you decide on a standard to use, preferably one that is based on the IMO compendium, I think you have a much better chance to succeed. And I know this from experience, that it's just between national administrations can be tricky. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that outlook on the realities there of starting a project in the planning phase. And I'm sure we're going to hear some fascinating examples in the symposium planned for 18th to 19th of January of countries who've actually gone through that process. Going to be very excited to hear of those and how other members can learn. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome people coming in from Egypt, from Tanzania. We have someone in from Australia, also colleagues from the World Customs Organization. A very warm welcome to all of you, and also a very interesting and engaging chat on the definition between what a port community system is and a maritime single window, which looks to have been resolved actually between the chatties. So very interesting and great engagement there. I guess I'd like to turn to shipping and Jeppe, really, based on what Michael has said about, once dealing with governance, what about on the practical side? I mean, how ready would you say shipping is to submit electronically all data requirements when calling at ports?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Victor, and thank you for that. I think we have to be realistic that in general, just about 85% of all ship owners do have less than 5 ships. And thus, they may not have an internal department for developing all sorts of software solutions. So they may look into external solutions. And in general, the information which needs to be exchanged, for instance, through the Maritime Single Window, are already information which are exchanged between the ship and the headquarter ashore. So one way or the other, they are synchronized and they have shared information. So so in general, for shipping industry to be ready in this regard, it's for us to make sure that when we submit information, which are already there, when we submit that to the port, it needs to be in a structured and harmonized format and protocol. And then we have to ask the ship system software developers internally or externally to implement this kind of protocol and format. And in a way, you may see this IMO compendium as a kind of maritime dictionary or a telephone book, meaning that whatever information you need to exchange, you look up in the dictionary to see the format of that information, and that should be implemented into the ship system. And yes, it may take some time, but we need to have, coming back to the bow tie, you need to have the authority part of it ready by 1st January 2024, and then as soon as possible, the shipping industry and the software developers may adapt to this format, so we can have a smart exchange. Hopefully, cross fingers, we will have machine-to-machine exchange, so we will not have administrative burden put on top of the exchange. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive response, Jeppe. And again, the emphasis on getting the basics right in terms of the structure and standards of data prior to implementation is crucial there. And I guess that leads into the question I'd like now to ask about to Patrick. There's also been the debate in the chat about, you know, the Maritime Single Window, how that perhaps migrates to port community system. When it comes to the whole business of port call process optimization, how does the MSW or Maritime Single Window relate to that, what you were mentioning in the last slide? Be quite interested to hear.
Yeah, I think it's a parallel step, you could say, the port call optimization. Again, I refer to that roadmap that we developed with the World Bank a couple of years ago, which sort of puts Maritime Single Window and port call optimization at the same level in progressing towards what in the end people call a smart port concept, where you're making use of all potential innovative technology and data to optimize your entire operation. But port call optimization is the first step. It's about the ship-to-shore data exchange using the same standards. And what I said before, it's a triple win. It's efficiency, but it's also reduced emissions and increased safety if a ship can go straight to the berth and commence operations and doesn't have to wait or on anchor or maneuver before it can come to its actual place of operation. And what is the great opportunity, and referring to what has been done, the work that's been done on the compendium, is that the three levels of data that you need, apart from the administrative data, which are in the IMO FAL forms, you also need the nautical data, like the port depth and water levels, the port infrastructure information, and operational information. So data on the arrival and departure at berth and at pilot boarding place, and also the starting and completion times of the vessel and the cargo services. These are the three pillars of data that you need in order to optimize a port call. A great job has been done by the International Task Force Port Call Optimization, which has worked very closely also together with the IMO and the GIA, the Greenhouse Gas Industry Alliance, who produced in turn also specific guidance on the aspect of just-in-time arrival. So I think we have the standards now, which is the great thing. I mean, the different standardization bodies that are relevant here, like the International Hydrographical Organization, the IMO, and also the ISO. All that work has been done. It's available there in the compendium. So what we need now is a massive campaign, I would say, for ports and the port, not just ports, I mean, the wider community that has these data, needs to share these data to start implementing it. I think that is really what our next challenge is, and some ports are already taking the lead in that process.
Yes.
And it's a stepping stone to what I said before, which is even more challenging, is of course the whole supply chain process, also the back door of the port, the land, the hinterland connections, the railroad, barge, and everything that can come together. But we're building it step by step, stone by stone. But port call optimization is parallel to the single window, and thanks to all the good work that has been done on standards and integrating that also as part of the compendium, I think we got all the building blocks. Now we need to sort of use them and make it happen.
Okay, thank you for that, Patrick, and very interesting to hear. And we've also been seeing a lot being communicated about not just green corridors being set up, but also digital corridors being set up between ports around the world involving all stakeholders. So we very much look forward to hearing about those aspects in the January symposium, as well as the shipping side of the story, combined with IMO as regulator on their side of the story as we look towards this deadline in January for the implementation of the Maritime Single Window, or better said, the right-hand side of the bow tie from Jeppe's side. I see now we also have quite a big European presence, some greetings coming in from France, Montenegro, and Poland as well. So it's a real international mix that are watching the live stream now. We are getting quite close now towards the closing of the webinar. So firstly, I'd like to thank you for your participation in the questions and the remarks in the Q&A. we can now turn to what we can look for and look ahead, what Patrick was mentioning about how we can now put it all this in practice. So I'd like to invite some closing remarks to be made by Julian Abril, who is working with Heike as head of facilitation section of the IMO's Maritime Safety Division. Over to you, Julian.
Many thanks, Victor, and I'd like to thank our speakers today and the moderator, as well as our audience for joining us. I'm sure the important messages and recommendations delivered today have reached many of you in the journey of planning and implementing a maritime single window. We hope to see you all in January at the IMO Hybrid Symposium that will be remote and in person, where you will hear from experts on maritime single window implementation and digitalization, and we will be able to share lessons learned and benefits of maritime single window. The symposium will be of special interest to administrations involved in clearance at ports, in particular customs, port authorities, and maritime administrations. As you may be aware, these authorities may have in place already a type of single window in your countries, but their participation is encouraged to fully understand the challenges and opportunities ahead, something that we intend to discuss at the symposium. Of course, other stakeholders are interested in the symposium, in particular ship masters, ship owners, managers, and ship agents. I encourage you to disseminate the celebration of the symposium in your respective countries as much as possible. The recording of this webinar will be available from our IMO YouTube channel, and thank you very much and have a nice afternoon. Thank you. Over to you, Victor.
Yes, thank you so much, Julian. And we'd also like to offer a special thanks to Martina Fontanet and also the communications departments of both BIMCO and IMO for their collaboration on this great webinar. We very much look forward to having this symposium hosted by the IMO in London, whether you come in virtually or whether you come in person. And we'll be building a campaign, as Patrick mentioned, to get all our parties together to make sure that we can get this on board during the next year or so. So with that, I think we can now close. I'd like to thank everyone for their participation again and look forward to seeing everyone in January, hopefully.